I'm Dean Walker, and welcome to the Poetry of Predicament podcast, a podcast for people brave enough to face humanity's challenges and problems, and most importantly, our numerous predicaments. The Poetry of Predicament is a podcast meant to inspire us to bring forth grace, beauty, and connection with the web of life in the face of a predicament-laden world. This episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast welcome one of our favorite guests of all time here on the podcast, regenerative systems designer Joe Brewer. Speaks to us from his relatively new home in Colombia. A remarkable conversation with Joe Brewer. Well, I'm really glad we're here, and thank you so much for making time, because I can only imagine how full your world is, and so thanks.
Of course. Now, I have a very specific memory of when we spoke last year and how there was such an obvious depth of like shared perspective in struggle and in empowerment,
Yeah.
like the surprising places where it comes into being
Yeah.
that I'm looking forward to talking again.
The sort of brief, slightly deeper check-in is that life is an extraordinary mixed bag. That on the one hand, I'm experiencing more extraordinary transformation-based uh, depth in relationship and creativity, being deeply inspired by people who are creative and courageous and generous of spirit, within a full knowing that we are in existentially predicament-laden times,
Yeah.
and that there's no good reason to be extraordinarily alive or connected or creative or generous, and they're that way anyway. And
Yeah.
those
You know, so,
relationships and those elements really make it worth getting out of bed in the morning, with a magic and a, a crackling aliveness in those connections with those folks. So for that's the one side of a mixed bag. The other side of the mixed bag is a part of my practices and my life for a long time has been a study of energetics, and some as a kind of a shamanic based energetics practice. And my scanning of the world energetically uh, is even more brutal and
yeah.
even more destined to have humanity crush itself and many others on its way. The mixture of the two is this bittersweet that is hard to put into scale.
Yeah.
So that's the short version of a deeper check-in.
Yeah. No, I wanted to share that at this really beautiful moment in early October when we were staying in Bremerton near Seattle, and I was invited to speak in Bellingham on the same day that Michael Dowd was. And so we were able to ride in the van with him and Connie, and he and I presented together. And you know, we've been friends for about 10 years, so it
Yeah,
wasn't like we had never met, but you know, to be around two people like them who are exactly that mixed bag every single day.
yeah,
Um, it was just an elation of connection. Like every moment was meaningful
yeah.
and every moment was fleeting. And like, it was really cool. Hi, Elise. Do you want to say hi to my friend Dean? What are you eating? Where did you get that? Mama gave that to you?
Hi.
Say hi so you can hear.
Hi there.
Which one's yours? Which one's mine? I don't know. Is there one for me? Whoa, where did those come from?
Vendor on the street, it's really good.
Whoa, street vendor bringing homemade tamale.
Good. It's not a tamale.
Oh, it's not. It's actually
Tamale.
actually it's like a sweet bread, cornbread kind of thing, which is yeah. Elisa's dance pretty much sums it all up. Do that dance again, Elise. That's how we should feel about this right here. She's totally got it. Yeah, like a good example of what you're talking about is in the discernment place where I see people not discerning is, whoa, this is excited, is that this is going to be good. All of my like social justice progressive friends in the US who are like, we might be able to do things like defund the police. And I'm like, wait a second. If you defund the police, doesn't that mean that the fascist military dictatorship in the White House and its whole infrastructure, they're not going to just declare martial law and send in the military when there's a problem? They're not going to fabricate a problem with psychological warfare on the population? Like, I mean, I'm not even a pessimist. My wiring is not pessimistic.
Yeah.
But come on, guys, you're playing chess.
Yeah.
So, sociopaths have a bigger chessboard. They have a larger strategy space because they're not encumbered by conscience. Yeah, I'm like wired positive, right? Like my friends are like, Joe, you're such a goofball. And people who read my writings like, Joe, you're so serious and depressed. And I'm like, they're both true.
Yeah. Yeah. Why not? And so, let yourself speak as much as you will about what you're up to. And if there are particular topics within that you'd like to head toward today, please, maybe you could mention them now so I can know to go there, but if not, bring them up as we go.
Yeah. One thing I want to share that grew out of just after we talked last year was I had a big active narcissism response pattern among a couple of people I was interacting with in Costa Rica, and it really went ugly. So we left Costa Rica. And one of the things I learned was I have a particular kind of charisma that attracts narcissistic people like moths to a flame.
Mm.
And so I've been and I've had a couple of bad experiences before. This one just happened to be the worst. And I've learned to be as egoless in my work as I can, in part because it's actually more effective. But, and I've learned that it is actually more effective. It's a different kind of leadership. But the other is that I don't want to activate those narcissists.
Right.
And one way that I activate narcissists is talking as though I'm doing something really important. So there's a paradox, right? Of what I'm doing is important, but if I say it in my charismatic way, it actually makes me look like a narcissist, or potentially I can be interpreted that way, and it attracts those people. And so what I've been learning to do is to give everything away. So I do gift economy.
Yeah.
And then it's everyone's, so there's no competition. So no one can come in and compete with me for trying to take over their space. It's everyone's space, not my space. I don't work with an organization because there are dynamics around the ego attachments to organizations. And I really don't make the work about me, even though I tell a lot of stories about how I'm living.
Sure.
And what I'm doing. And what I've learned, and I think this is something we should really talk about, is this idea of cultural scaffolding, or how to create the social supports for people to learn how to make changes in their lives concretely by the role modeling of others and by active help and mentoring from others. And it's sort of like the anti-guru sort of a thing, but it's super important. And so definitely I want to weave in the conversation about earth regenerators, about what it means to regenerate the earth, about what's going on in the world and how fucked it is. We can go back and forth in the directions. but at the core is how people become the social supports for other people as we all make these transitions. That's
Right.
like a kind of kernel to build around.
Right. That particular piece right there is as close to the center of what I see the interface between the emphasis of my body of work and yours. It just seems like that's where the overlap occurs. So we could spend as much time there as you can tolerate. I'd be just fine with it. So thank you. Good. All right. So while you munch for a minute,
I'm done munching. Munching is done.
okay.
So I'm ready to roll.
All
It
right.
was fast to eat something. That was yummy.
All right. Well, I'm just going to say the official words in case I get a real Jones for an official startup of this episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast. And I'm just really delighted to be here today speaking with one of my favorite guests and one of my favorite spokespeople for extraordinary possibility. I don't know what you call yourself these days, but that's kind of where I've landed when I think of you, Joe Brewer. And Joe, I just thank you so much for coming on and spending time and making some space in, I'm sure, a busy world to explore this particular interface that we've just been talking about. And I'll feather in a couple of little excerpts from the time prior when we've had the camera rolling and lots of different fun things going on. And a couple little pieces I would like to excerpt out and be sure that they get included in our conversation. And I want to start by just speaking about I'm 18 degrees removed from you because I know you're quite a distance away. I think it's in Colombia. Yes.
Yes, we're in Colombia.
Yeah, and so I would just appreciate it if you wouldn't mind just giving us a quick update about where you've landed, how this chapter of life is unfolding for you, and I just want to kind of re-speak. I've spoken about you and your endeavors of late on some earlier podcasts, and I particularly was impressed by one of your webinar episodes in which you spoke of parenting, regenerative parenting, and that's such a phenomenal fit with a side project that we've got going on here in the Living Resilience Deep Academy world, which is kind of a sister podcast and bunch of curated content called Take My Hand, Conscious Parenting in a Time of Stolen Dreams. And so when you put out what you put out about parenting in a regenerative frame and how you spoke and the kind of structureless structure with which you delivered what you had to say, I just knew that there was going to be a whole lot to talk about, a whole lot to share about. And I also just want to elaborate on what we sort of touched on when we first connected up here before we got officially going, and that is to say, these are clearly time. Actually, it's been since well before I put out my book. I saw this, like no other time that I'm aware of, is a time to find our people. And it's a time to find what truly matters most to us, each and every one. And there's a preciousness that we've already shared, just even in the first minute or two that we were talking, where I thought, damn, kindred spirit, beautiful.
No doubt.
Just,
No doubt.
just so beautiful. And I so appreciate your dogged commitment to possibility and to being able to live into lives far larger and more possibility filled and more quality relationship filled than anything we've seen in our lifetimes to date. And doing all of that in the face of easily the most globally existentially challenged times that humanity's ever seen. So, I don't want to get too hyper, serious here, or too much gravitas even in the introduction, but I just want to let you know all those things are floating through, and it is sweet ass stuff you're up to, and really a pleasure to speak with you, and we'll get into hopefully soon your update, and just a real pleasure to have you here. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, I really resonate with what you're saying about how we need to find our people. And this is something that's really a big deal for us right now, because my wife and I have a daughter that's 3.5 years old. We had a child, eyes wide open, fully aware that we're in the middle of planetary collapse, fully aware that the globalized economic system has a timestamp and that it's in the process of dying, and that it's taking down a good part of the Earth's biosphere with it. Mm-hmm. And there are some thresholds that, if crossed, would cause humans to go extinct. So we're very much in this domain, as I know you talk about a lot in this podcast. So to choose to have a child in that time means that we put a commitment into the future. We believe in humans, and we have this beautiful child that's still precious and vulnerable, 3.5 years old, that we see every day as part of the dangerous future we're entering into. Mm-hmm. And amazingly, she is our elixir, because she's like the acid, the corrosive chemical that burns away whatever is too weak and leaves only the pure metal behind. Uh-huh. She made us focus on what's actually important in our lives and finally make the big transformational changes that Jessica, my wife, we had talked about this for 15 years in one form or another. And so where we are now is living into what we think is needed for children. We moved to Colombia. We were in Costa Rica last year. The reason we were in Costa Rica is a relevant thing to jump off of, because we went there to join an effort to create bioregional regenerative economic systems, and also to immerse our daughter in a biodiversity hotspot. So her normal would be intact ecosystems. And of course, the human ecosystems were problematic, and we didn't have the social supports to raise a child. We were way out and off the grid in a tropical rainforest, and there were some problematic people we interacted with that indicated to us that our next move needed to be into community. We needed regenerative community and not regenerative project. So we came to Colombia, to a place called Barichara, which is in the northern Andes on a deforested plateau surrounded by mountains on 3 sides, deforested for the tobacco plantations decades ago, becoming a desert. The kind of place you'd say, why would you go there with your child? The reason is the Barichara is this town of about 5,000 people. It's a national monument for Colombia because of the depth of local art and craft culture. The earthen construction, the stonemasons, the basket weavers, the ceramics, the local food, which is campesino food from the mountains. Mm-hmm. This is old culture people. But also there is an association of 40 families that collectively set aside 6.5 hectares of land, 12 or 13 acres of land, to create a community food forest. So for 10 years, they have been building a reforestation project. And we met this couple with 3 small children that came to this food forest to create an education program for children, where children would lead the reforestation effort. And we had to know what that was like. So we came here to not just to, it wasn't to enroll our daughter. It wasn't a school that's formalized. We came as parents to co-create it with their family and our family and the families of the other children. We arrived in November, so we've been here for about half a year. And we are now participating in reforestation, watershed restoration, because it's a place becoming a desert, building an alternative economic system, and it's all centered around raising children and how the families integrate into the raising of children. And at the same time, there's a whole story, a lot of things that we should go into related to this as we talk. But in parallel with this, I've continued holding a piece of knowledge that, or a perspective that I felt like if I died without sharing it, that my life would have missed something. And so after we arrived here in December, I finally started writing a book. So I've resisted writing a book for more than a decade.
Yeah.
I've wanted to and felt it wasn't time. And the book was to explain how I've come to the conclusion that there is a way to keep humans from going extinct. And I have, dispelled, my skeptical mind has discredited several false narratives of hope about sustainability. And as I kept tearing away the false possibilities, I found stronger and stronger ground on a real pathway that humanity can walk. So the name of the book is The Design Pathway for Regenerating Earth. And as I started writing it, like 2 weeks of writing, I'd written the first 16 chapters. It was like, it just flowed. Like I'd been thinking about this stuff for 15 years. And I immediately felt like the time is now. It would be unethical to try to make money off of this. I'm not going to do the normal publishing game. So instead, I posted on social media that I was creating a study group for the book chapters. And anyone who would like to join could join. Well, that started around December 29th, just before New Year's. Here we are in the middle of June. And today or tomorrow, we will cross over 1,500 members of the study group. Mm-hmm. And these webinars that I'm giving twice a month are part of the study group. And so we're building a conversation around the design pathway for regenerating Earth, the set of human cultures that become regenerative, that can create an insulating membrane around themselves through permaculture practices, ecological restoration, and indigenous spirituality. More than that, but you already get a sense of what it's like. And that while this exploded pulse of excessive humanity collapses, and the human population goes down, and the possibilities for regenerating the biosphere increase as this destructive system loses its strength to have a stranglehold, these places become the seed beds for the new economic paradigm, which is a planetary scale network of regenerative local economic systems.
Yeah.
And we talked about this a little bit last time, but that's the vision. But what we see here is doing it with children.
Yeah. Wow. It's fantastic. I think this is a good first moment, and we'll do it at the end as well. Can you point us all toward how to access whatever you might have on the internet? If there's some way for people to catch up with what you were just describing, sounds like trickle out delivery of various chapters of your book and so on. How do we connect with you?
The best way is on your cell phone. Go to the App Store and download the app for Mighty Networks. Mighty Networks is an online tool for offering online courses and education programs, which people make money by selling their courses. In my case, it's gift economy. I'm giving everything away, and I have fans who support me on Patreon. And so if you download Mighty Networks, then just type in Earth Regenerators into the search, and you will find this network and just join it. You can also do it through a web browser on your computer. So go to Mighty Networks or type in Google Earth Regenerators Mighty Networks, and you'll find it. And And then, of course, all the usual ways of finding me by typing my name into Google, Facebook, Twitter,
Right on.
LinkedIn, and all of that. And the key thing about Earth Regenerators is that I wrote the book to prototype a curriculum, and the curriculum is emerging across that network. The
Right.
curriculum is, how do we learn how to regenerate the Earth? Not how do I teach it? See, there's a difference. How do all of us together learn how to do this?
Right.
This is why there's so many people gathering around it.
Right. Well, maybe this is a good kind of shifting point to what I keep thinking is the interface point. Every time we talk, every time I hear you present in any form, it seems like where we interface is in the human capacities, the human core competencies, the human elements that we would be wise to expand our capacities and expand our skill sets and keep um, innovating. Like how alive can we have our growing edge be for how to be in relationship with each other at a comparable level to what I believe you're articulating so beautifully at the beginning here is the potential of relating with and reconnecting with Earth at an extraordinarily at a much needed level. What I guess I've always been really sparked by when we talk is what's the human version of that level of reconnection, of that level of new possibility in relating. And so, if it's all right with you, I'd love to spend quite a bit of time there because I know you think there a lot. And I'm so
Yeah.
curious what you see. And perhaps you've already written about it. I'm so embarrassed to say that I didn't know about the trickle out of the chapters, and you might have already written so much about this. So I'm feel like I'm catching up. Like, oh my God, what did I miss? So I'm
Well,
wondering.
I want to tell us, yeah, let me tell it as a story because we're in the
Yeah.
middle of something right now that very concretely demonstrates it. Here in Barichara, just last week, it was announced that the three towns, Barichara, the town of Villanueva, and the town of Cabrera, which altogether have between 10 and 15,000 people. It's all small towns. Um, each of them has a reservoir of water. And in aggregate, they have less than 3 months of water supply left. So we're like right on the edge of people needing to leave because there's no water. Last week, there was a heavy torrential downpour, like one of those rains that just makes rivers. And the town of Barichara is a 16th century Spanish colonial town. So it's got cobblestone streets. And where we live, it's on a fairly steep slope. So during the heavy rain, we went out of our house onto the street and there was a river. Like there was enough water to solve our water problems, running away down the hill into the valley to the river below.
Yep.
So I grabbed a pickaxe because we've been digging ponds for water retention projects to absorb water into the ground. I grabbed a pickaxe. I went out into this heavy rain. My wife grabbed a flashlight. We walked 2 streets up the hill to a place where the water was gushing down a dirt road, and then it became cobblestone, and it was washing all the dirt and gravel down into the town. And in 10 minutes, while my wife held the flashlight, I dug a diversion channel to direct about 20% of that water into a little, like an empty lot with bushes and trees that it could absorb the water. So in 10 minutes, I was able to divert like 1/6 of the water that was being wasted into the ground in 10 minutes. So we're watching the water this closely. It's actually just starting to rain right now. I don't know if you can hear it on the tin roof above us. But And what we're doing by having this relationship to water is what I want to tell you. This is the powerful thing. We started watching the channels of erosion on the paths in that food forest, that community food forest I mentioned earlier. And one morning I went up there with my daughter, with Elise, and we had made oatmeal and we took a picnic breakfast up to the community food forest. And while we're up there, I saw a couple of little tracks of erosion on the trail. So I thought we should get the pickaxe. And a friend of ours and I, we've been digging these little diversion ponds. Well, let's come back here later today and do that. But then by the time we got down to his house an hour later, we decided we should send a message out to every one of our friends who said they wanted to help with this. So I just sent a WhatsApp message to a couple of families that I'm talking to. Said this afternoon at 4 o'clock, if you want to join us, meet in the food forest. We'll have a pickaxe and we'll show you how to dig diversion channels. 15 people showed up. Mm-hmm. Parents with their children. Children, 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds, all running around, one pickaxe and 15 people. And we dug 2 little ponds and we showed everyone how to do it. So what this means is we listen to the water, we learn the language of water, we go out and directly observe the water when it's moving, and then we gather human beings to become the conscious reinvestment of water. We're directing the water off the hiking trail into a little ditch that we dig where we can plant trees and they'll grow more quickly, which of course will pull more water into the ground and will eventually reverse desertification. Now, a week later, we're now forming a water brigade, 10 or 15 people, each of whom has a pickaxe, who knows how to dig these little diversion channels. So anytime it rains, any one of them might grab their pickaxe and go outside and redirect some water into the ground. So we are now a system of collective intelligence, where the water is the intelligence and the humans are the guiding of the intelligence into restoring life capacity into the land. So instead of saying, oh shit, we're gonna run out of water, let's leave, it's, I better listen to the water and bring my pickaxe. Nice. And so this is, for me, it exemplifies the realm of possibility for humans to be the consciousness of the earth in this very concrete way. Yeah. Like, we actually can take this water that's falling right now and we can direct it into plants, into microorganisms, into mushrooms, into regenerated soils. And then the rain will come and there'll be more and more rain. And so we're doing this at the micro scale to prepare the humans. It's sort of like preparing your garden bed for planting. Mm-hmm. We have a vision for about a 50,000 hectare project, regenerating an entire deforested plateau. That's about 400 square kilometers of land. And to do that, we need a lot of humans who know how to listen to water and bring their pickaxe. Yeah. And eventually we need people who know the different plants, how to collect the seeds from the trees, what environments to plant them in. And so there's a lot of activities, and I'm only naming one of them, these little water ditches. But this is the kind of thing that is coming alive here. And actually it's coming alive in many places. I'm not describing Body Chara as like special. I'm just showing you what's possible with what we're doing here.
Right on. So I'm thank you for that story. And it's always inspiring to hear what emerges if you just let it go in a slightly different direction. There are a few elements that you've sort of mentioned as you were giving us that recap of recent chapters of life that you've been through, and some of them have worked well and some of them not so well and so on. And I'm curious if you could give us your most current rendition of pieces of the human element that really seem to help? When these elements are in place in one or more people who are in a neighborhood or a community, that things seem to go better when these pieces are in place. And perhaps also anything that you could update us about elements that don't seem to work so well. When these pieces are in place, there's more friction, there's more unworkability, whatever you might like to call it. Do you have any updates about either of those?
Yeah, I want to start with the negative and then really highlight the positive from it.
Great.
And one thing I think is very problematic is people who have insecure egos and they experience the world as scarce and competitive. Now, this is pretty obvious. I think all of us have dealt with this problem. But I watched last year some very beautiful, large-scale regenerative ideas were actively undermined and destroyed by one or two people with really weak ego attachments, who then turned on their allies and treated them like enemies and undermined all of the capacity. So it's profound how dangerous and harmful that is. Another thing I've seen that's really difficult, really problematic is complaining, the mindset of complaining. The mindset of, this is bad, I don't like it, I don't like what that person, he said, she said. That whole thing is completely understandable that people do it. But the problem I see with it, I mean, there are many problems, but the problem I see related to this need to regenerate landscapes and create resiliency for communities is that it is a distraction from what's actually important. And the ability, this turns now to something that I think is really positive, really important, is people who can hold focus on what is important. So for example, a few months ago, COVID-19 hits. Barichara is a tourist town. 80% of the revenue here comes from tourism. They lock us down. We're one of the first towns to be locked down in Colombia. There are 0 cases of the virus. There have not been any cases at all, even to this date, 0 cases of COVID. We're in a remote mountain town. We're still on lockdown for like 3.5 months. And everyone is worried about what do we do to bring tourism back? Because 80% of the economy went away overnight. The economy was destroyed by COVID with 0 cases because the lockdown killed the economy. And like I just said earlier, we have less than 3 months of water. What would have happened if there had been more tourists and more demand for water? We would have 1 month of water or less if the tourists had been here. So those of us right on day one, back in like beginning of March, we're like, we're on lockdown and we're supposed to stay in our houses, but we need to organize work parties and dig water retention systems and build forest. And the rainy season is coming. We need to be ready to plant trees. So we need to be gathering the seeds and cultivating the seedlings in preparation for planting, but we're all stuck in our houses. So you see this ability to see COVID is important. COVID is causing problems. There are a lot of old people living here that if they got it, they would be at risk of dying. We do care about that, but actually more important than that is water, food security, and reforestation. Because we're thinking systemically. So there's a set of people who are already here before my family arrived. It's not like we came and convinced everyone of this. We joined local people who were already thinking this way. And they are the anchors. They're like the large rock in the whitewater rapids, that when all of the sediment and soil is being moved and churned, that rock stays there. So there's a set of people who have been holding, it's about water the whole time. And you need people that know what's important and they're dogged. They're even like, dogmatic is a negative word, but here I mean like, they don't let go of it ever. They always hold it in their mind as important. Now they might go and do something else. Like some of my friends created a a solidarity food system, like a CSA, a community supported agriculture, to help the local farmers who just lost all their income when tourism went away, and to feed families at lower cost because they had less money. But at the same time, they were thinking about helping those farmers learn about water retention. So it wasn't either or, they were just holding both at the same time. And you think of the flexibility that comes with that rigidness, which is the ability to hold in a flexible way the stream of new problems, dealing with them as they come up, but always coming back to what's important. Like one thing we did was we learned where the police were and where they weren't, and when we could sneak out of the house without causing any health risks due to COVID, and go and do things to build soils to retain water in the soils when the rains came. So we were composting for them. So it's things like this. They're a very big, good strategic flexibility around actions with strategic focus and rigidity around discerning what's important.
Yeah, beautiful. Wow. Is there any hope of lifting the lockdown anytime soon?
It started lifting already, but just slowly. And the big problem we have here is a specific model of quote unquote leadership in Colombia, which is there's a lot of nepotism and oligarchy. So people who are in elected positions oftentimes are corrupt, and the mayor of this town is corrupt. The previous mayor was sent to jail, which is unusual. They actually put him in jail. And so the way that these corrupt leaders make decisions is they choose not to make decisions so they can't be accountable for anything. So like Bogota, which has this population of 8 million people, is a total, it's like New York City, right? It's got very specific requirements for COVID. Well, the national policy was, here's what you do in the big cities, and the smaller towns with 0 cases can make their own decisions. What the mayor here decided to do was default to using Bogota's policies so that they'd never be held accountable for making their own decisions, which is why we've remained on lockdown. It's actually more rigid here than in Bogota at this point in time.
Right.
Because the mayor doesn't want to be held responsible for making a decision.
Yeah.
So some really interesting patterns of human incompetency that sort of make the space for all this community organizing that's really beautiful as we work around the broken institutions.
You know, I'd like to touch back into an earlier conversation that we had. I don't know if it was more than I think it was more than a year ago. I have touched into that conversation countless times, because my question for you was, what are the inner capacities and skills that someone would want to bring? What kind of inner preparation, inner work would a person want to do if they were to approach, let's just say, one of these larger scale experimental, regenerative design programs that you're putting together, that you're working? If they wanted to come and learn and participate and find out how to perhaps take pieces of it to where they are and so on, how could they prepare themselves to be most able, most open to being receptive to what is going on, but perhaps more importantly, to participate in a way that was an addition, that they were actually contributing by being there rather than taking away vital energy from the project? And so I'm curious if, your answer then was, you took no time to respond. You said people would need an advanced ability to self-regulate and psychological flexibility. So I've taken much poetic license with both of those as I've repeated the story and recounted your response, because that's an awful lot of of what is at the center of the work that I'm offering is just a whole number of different ways of building those capacities, ways of building those skill sets, and people choosing for themselves what kind of practices of reconnection that they could bring to their own lives that would then have them be that alive, vibrant contribution in whatever they're choosing to do. I'm curious if you would add to or change that quick answer that you gave, a while back, in terms of what's the inner work that people might want to consider doing if they want
Yeah,
to be truly a contribution to this kind of work.
I've been thinking about this through two related ideas that expand upon what we talked about before.
Mm-hmm.
And they became clear for me when I was writing my book, because I wrote book chapters about each of them. And one of them was about grieving. And I came to a really important insight about grieving. Of course, there's all the great work of people like Joanna Macy, and I'm really just standing upon and continuing on their work and having this perspective. But what I realized was that grieving comes from an ability to be consciously aware and sensitive, to have a kind of bleeding compassion or raw compassion, where you care about things, but it hurts you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like if you care about like if you see someone step on a worm after the rain and you go, oh, and you feel bad for the worm, then you're sensitive and you get hurt by it.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of ways that people learn to become numb to that, and they learn to shut it off. What I realized was that exact human capacity to feel pain for something that we love or that we feel connected to feel pain when it's hurt, is exactly the capacity we need to do regenerative work. Because what it is it's the capacity to feel into the aliveness of a living system,
Mm-hmm.
to extend your conscious awareness into, like I was talking about the movement of water. Every living thing is animated dust dancing through the movement of water. Everything. You and I are water dancing with dust. And so water is, and it's just literally, that's like biochemistry. And so it's, I think I coined that phrase, but I might have stolen it from someone unconsciously, because I integrate a lot of ideas. I mean, obviously ash to ash, dust to dust, there's an old version of this. But what I realized was that this ability to feel aliveness is how you bring life to a dying landscape. If you go into a degraded landscape, there's still life there. But if the life is less vibrant, you have to be more sensitive, like a tuning fork, to attune yourself to its vibrations. And that means the part of you that is hurt to feel the pain is exactly the instrument of connection.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a big insight for me, because I had spent more time with permaculture practitioners, and that's what they do. And now I'm a permaculture practitioner, and that's what I'm doing. Going and digging that diversion channel in the heavy rain was, I felt where the land needs the water to go. And so that was a big insight for me. The other big insight for me came from studying ecological succession and trying to explain the positive framing of collapse. Because I knew that talking about planetary collapse, I was actually talking about something positive, but people didn't understand it because it sounded negative. That I was describing this possibility of what emerges when collapse occurs. And what I came to realize, because we started learning about how to build a forest, and a forest is a complex ecosystem that goes through stages of development. Ecologists call these stages of development, they call them stages of succession, because one of them succeeds, one of them comes after the previous one. So a simple example is, you have a barren ground and you have these pioneering or colonizing plants that survive, and full exposure to the sun and really high saline soils and so on. But then as they start to grow, they change the composition of the soil. They might put more nitrogen in it, for example. They might add a little bit of shade. And then there are types of plants that couldn't have lived there before, but now they can. And so what happens is eventually this growth process self-destructs. It becomes so opportune for a wave of new species that the new species outcompete and destroy or collapse the structure that came before. And so this collapse pattern is what enables the succession to occur. And I actually had a concrete way of thinking about this, and it had to do with fear of death. Because we're working in this community food forest here in Barichara, and there are two elder women who started the project really don't like the ants because the ants eat all the leaves of their trees. And they're trying to grow trees. But we know from ecological research that ants accelerate the creation of soil in desert environments. And actually they do that by killing the trees. So you have to embrace the death of the trees to bring soil for the new trees. So instead of clinging to and trying to keep your trees alive, like you're afraid of them dying, you have to help them die in a healthy way for ecological succession to occur. Mm. So there are ways that we set the stage for collapse so that a maturing or complexifying of ecology can occur.
Yeah.
But the conditions have to be right. It doesn't always happen. So this insight for me was like, this is the preparation, is how to build something so you can help it die. You think of the emotional and spiritual preparation involved so that you can help the next thing to emerge.
Yeah. So it seems like what you're describing is taking it to a larger framing, reframing of something that in a smaller frame strictly looks like death, strictly looks like the diminution of possibility. It looks like something to be avoided. It looks like something to be fixed, like it's a problem. And if we could just stop that, then we could move on to something more of the thing that we think we're after. What I think I'm hearing as you were describing some of these stories is that what looks like the problem starts to take on a liquidity. It all of a sudden, it doesn't have a form. And your attention and your efforts are completely elsewhere. Is that fair to say?
I think so. We should unpack it more to see if that is actually right. It's definitely mostly right and possibly entirely right. And the important thing to think about to understand how this works is what Francisco Varela and Humberto Maturana call autopoiesis, which is the dynamic pattern of a living system, where it reproduces the condition of being alive moment to moment. As it uses up the resources it needs, it also secures and accumulates those same resources again. So like your body takes in oxygen, lets out carbon dioxide, and in that process, it needs to be able to bring in more oxygen and let out more carbon dioxide. So there's this continuous movement. It's never stopped. It's always continuing to flow. And when we look that way for ecosystems, then we're looking at things like food webs, or the technical term is trophic flow, the flow of energy and nutrients through the web of relationships.
Right.
Then when we look in that way, what we start to see is there's an impermanence of objects. The tree is not a tree. The tree is a dynamic process of taking in nutrients, putting them back into its environment, and eventually its body becomes part of the environment again.
Yeah.
And when we look in that pattern and process way, then our job is to support the recycling of nutrients.
Yep.
And then we're in that flow, always in that flow.
I guess, thank you. That was very clarifying. And I think I did a poor job of distinguishing the piece that I was relying on when I said what I last said, which is this notion of a liquid state. It's I'm certainly not the inventor of the term, and there are probably other terms for it as well, but what I was pointing at is our in the business as usual paradigm, the one of the biggest demons is uncertainty or instability. Like what we want is this rigid stability and certainty so we can keep on growing in infinite growth on a finite planet and so on. And the liquid state that I'm talking about is becoming familiar with, and for me it's a quite a distinct inner state that is, of course, what I learned very early to avoid at all costs, to run away from as quickly as possible, but the first scent of it. But as I've learned to experience it and be present as I possibly can in the onset of a liquid state, when life is demanding of me, either, if you're going to stick around, this is not going to look or feel comfortable. It's not going to look and feel normal, predictable, stable at all. And this liquid state has actually become something that I have some affinity for. It's still uncomfortable as hell when it is. There's a certain amount of familiarity and a certain amount of being able to trust into something larger than that original picture of things are supposed to be stable. Life's only going good if it looks like this. So we need to put all of our resources into stopping that because it doesn't look like the good stuff. I'm sorry to be so drilled down into the detail of it, but what I was getting at is, time and again in your stories, I'm seeing that you and or the other folks that you're interacting with are finding a way to loosen the grip on things have to look away, or they've always gone this way, so we're going to continue that trend, no matter how self-sabotaging that might end up being. And you have, one way or another, come up with a way to be aligned with one another, that this could be uncomfortable, and here's some supporting facts and attributes of a healthy system that might help us be a little more comfortable as things get fluid.
Yeah,
Is that making any sense at all?
Yeah, the powerful thing about going into these fluid states, like where we're actively acknowledging them and moving with them, like a kayaker that's in a rapid, they are not directing the flow. They are following the flow, but they can have some choice in where they go in the flow, especially during jump points from, say, one eddy to another in the water. The powerful thing is when you learn how to do it together with other people. And I want to, again, make this really concrete with stories from our lives, because during the lockdown, one of the most egregious and terrible parts of the policy was an act of hostility towards small children. That children were not allowed out of the house during the lockdown in Barichara. And even right now, children 2 and under are not allowed out of the house. A lot of people are breaking this rule, but it's a rule. And I actually was taking my daughter to the forest, and the police caught us when we were on our way. Our daughter's 3.5. And they took our photo, documented who the people were with their child illegally outside, and sent us home.
Wow.
And so it's hostile toward children. And so here we are. When the lockdown started, we were living in a house with no outdoor space, no garden. And there are a lot of houses with gardens and outdoor space. So we found our way to a different house. In this house, you could see, if people are watching the video, that there's a lot of interior garden and open air, because we're in the tropics. So we're in a place with lots of connected outdoor space. Part of our reason for choosing this house is it's a beautiful house, much better for this outdoor space, but also our neighbor right at the end of this block is our daughter's best friend and her parents.
Mm-hmm.
So we could easily sneak out and go to the neighbor's house, or sneak out and walk 2 blocks to the community food forest and take both children with us. So we started doing this about 2 months ago. And now these 2 little girls are like sisters. They're so close. It's really beautiful. And a lot of the fluidity, this liquid state, has been how the 2 families, both seeing that we needed to just let ourselves ignore other interruptions. Like, we're walking by their house. My daughter wants to go in. She calls in. Their daughter says, come in, opens the door. Then all of us come in, whether the adults invited us or not. And we're just in this flow. And all of the adults are so happy for the kids to be playing together instead of alone that we just go with it. A month later, all of our families are gelling as like a social unit. And we're talking about buying land in the country together, maybe, just having these like connections on solid ground. And when we started doing these water projects, digging the ponds, it was the father of this other family. He and I have been the ones digging the ponds. And now we're building this water brigade and all of these activities around the dynamics of being in the forest with the kids, watching the patterns and being enlivened, feeling more alive because we're doing it. So our liquid state has created a really beautiful web of relationships with deep trust, with love between each other, and with really good communication capacities because we're operating from the flow.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't plan it. We had an intention. We'll go live closer to our daughter's friend, and maybe we'll get to interact with them. But then it all became a flow state, and it's been a flow state for 2.5 months. And a lot of possibilities are happening. And I want to share something else that just happened this weekend, because we discovered that we're actually almost in a preordained way. And I don't believe in destiny necessarily, but I do believe in walking a spiritual path and finding a deep resonance. That this weekend, something amazing happened, which requires a bit of backstory, but I'll tell the brief version first, is that I found myself in this very interesting position to help protect a piece of land in the surrounding countryside because of a relationship I have to a woman. It was her uncle's land. He died, and I helped them load and move his stuff, and I had this relationship. And this man was a weaver, a trainer of weaving. He had visited more than 200 indigenous cultures, learning their weaving practices, and had built a museum of weaving across all of the Andes.
Wow.
And like an incredible, incredible knowledge in this human being. And I helped pack up all of his weaving artifacts from his museum as he was going into hospice to die, because his niece was my friend. What I didn't know is the same father who's been digging the ponds with me, the father of our daughter's best friend, was in conversations to become an apprentice to this man until he became sick and died, and was working on an arrangement for their family to move there and manage the museum and teach weaving workshops. I didn't know this. But last week, my friend, the niece of the man who had died, she says, can you help me find someone to rent the house? Because the person renting it can't afford it anymore. And I said, I feel like that's a sacred land. I don't want to talk transactionally. Rather than renting the house, I'd like to talk to you about what you need and how we can create a solidarity relationship between families to protect this piece of land and this bit of culture. Turns out getting access to the house without paying rent, we're going to offer to donate money to pay like utilities, electricity, and internet. And our family and this family, including the man who is going to be the apprentice, have unlimited access to go there and do land regeneration and to develop educational programs with no money at all.
Yeah.
All of that. And here's the thing, this is on a piece of land where the indigenous people, who are called the Guane people, were exterminated by the Spanish 500 years ago. They were the fiercest resistors against the Spanish in all of this region. so fierce and resisting that a number of their leaders and their fiercest warriors committed suicide instead of being conquered. So technically this is unconquered land. And this piece of land is right in the heart of their original village where the Guane used to live.
Mm.
So we have the opportunity to protect a sacred piece of history with this cultural knowledge and this connection to our friend, like a whole, like click, 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 sacred connection, look at all these things.
Yeah.
Without any conscious awareness, this is what was coming, only by being in the fluid state.
Yeah. Mm.
It's powerful.
Powerful. Thank you.
Powerful.
Wow. Mm. You know, as the envelope of this particular conversation starts to close, I'm curious if you would give us some sense of what you may have offered in some of those chapters for people who are in far less optimal circumstances, you know, being as in as open an environment as you appear to be in, meaning far more apparent arable land, possible connection with community. Seems like there's quite a bit of alignment in that community. And I'm curious how you're speaking to people who are in tougher circumstances. You know, they might not have access at all to some of these elements, and yet there might be a way to carve out a similar niche on a much smaller scale in an urban environment in the USA. And I'm curious if you have any slightly adapted elements that you could offer for folks who are listening from a very different place and maybe just beginning in some of these conversations. Anything you can offer to bridge?
Yeah, I want to share something that I learned from our mutual friend, Michael Dowd, which he learned it from a guy named Edward Goldsmith. And Edward Goldsmith as a cultural anthropologist. And it's the insight that there's a very clear way to separate every sustainable culture on earth from every unsustainable culture on earth. It's kind of profound how simple it is and amazing how profound it is. And Michael Dowd calls it having pro-future social norms. But the way that Teddy Goldsmith talked about it was that there was a personification in the indigenous cultures that turned out to be sustainable. It turns out every sustainable culture in history has been indigenous. Not all indigenous cultures have been sustainable, but every sustainable culture has been indigenous. That they have personified relationships to the ecology where they survive. So they the river is a person, the rocks are a person, the forest is a person, the jaguar is a person, and so on. And they develop sacred responsibilities to those relationships, and they teach them to children. And they have rituals and practices around those sacred relationships. And this is the key to every sustainable culture. So I want to say that, and then I want to say that the future of humanity is those who become indigenous in the future. Those who develop those sacred relationships and fully integrated life systems. Everything about their lives is integrated into their landscapes. Their food, their water, their shelter, their clothes. Everything is integrated into their landscapes. Then they are indigenous. Indigenous isn't a special category of tribes from the past. It's a model of relationship to land. And once you understand that, everyone can be indigenous. And everyone can be the ancestor of future indigenous. And here's the opportunity for someone living in a big city in the US or anywhere else where they feel disconnected, is how can you become indigenous where you are? And the way to become indigenous is about cultivating sacred personal relationships to the land. walk around with your eyes open, your ears open, feeling the wind, watch the clouds move, look at the contours of the land, listen to the kinds of animals that are there, and treat them as sacred. If you do that, you are walking as though you are an indigenous person in that landscape. It might be clumsy and you may not know enough, and that's fine. You know, we are all the victims of colonization. Every one of us has indigenous ancestors, and most of us have had that stripped away by a form of cultural genocide. We are the conquered people of empires. And so we may not remember our indigenous histories, but all humans, through most of our history, were indigenous. So we have this capacity. What's amazing is if a person starts to do this, something is going to change very deeply. So it might sound simple. Walk down the street, watching the clouds and listening to the birds. But do it thinking about the future indigenous, the humans who live there in a sustainable way at some point in the future. And what you'll see is the veil is lifted. The illusion of permanence of that city goes away. When you see all the destructive things that don't honor sacred relationships, that have to go, so that entire cityscape is unsustainable, it has to die. Practice ecological succession in your mind. As it collapses and dies, how do you compost it to become those living webs for the future land? You don't have to take a single action from that perspective to have your life completely changed. Because you'll find eventually you have to take action. But that perspective is the thing that matters most. And anyone can do that at any time in any place.
Yeah. Joe Brewer, I just love that you're doing what you're doing. And I love how you're doing it. It is so easy for me to feel immersed and deeply trusting of the messages that you're sharing. It just feels like a generous rippling out from where you are, where you're doing what you're doing. There's a heartfulness in it, and as always, an integrity in it. I feel like we're really blessed to have you and the folks that you're connecting with down there rippling out what you're sending. And so it's been a joy talking with you, and I look forward to finding ways to keep bridging and weaving the folks who find their way to the work that I do, and to keep weaving them into the work that you're doing. And it just seems like there's such a kind of a cross nourishing that's going on, and I feel very, very thankful that you folks have made the choices that you're making, and that you're doing what you're doing and offering the things you are in the way that you are. So thank you so much.
What I feel like saying right now is that there is a gift that emerged when humans gained compassionate ability to have conceptual metaphor, the ability to see the world in a conceptual way that can be detached from the world. And then from that place of separation, look upon the world with love. And what's happening right now is there is a part of humanity that is able to be the earth expressing love to the earth. And as those of us who are able to do that because we haven't been too hurt or because we've healed from our pain, I have a lot of trauma and grief in my life as well to get to this place, that that we are a gift from the Great Mother, from the life-giving capacities of this planet, back to the life-giving capacities of this planet.
Yeah.
And so I was noticing how you were, in a sense, lavishing me with gratitude. Like you were saying these nice things to me. And yet I felt just very calm and comfortable. Like I didn't have to worry about having this ego response when you were saying it. Because what I felt was, I'm Gaia, the life energy of the earth. You are Gaia, the life energy of the earth. And we see each other as the same.
Yeah.
And in that place, I don't feel like I'm receiving it so much as I feel like it is flowing across us.
Yes.
And I do have an ego mind, and I'm still a human being and all of that, but it's so important to be able to sit in this place and to act from this place with what's happening in the world right now.
Yeah.
So, which is my way of saying, I feel the same toward you and what you're doing, and very much feel seen in it.
Yeah. Good. That was definitely the intention. Thank you. All right, Joe. You just keep up the good work, and at some point, maybe I'll be able to get myself down there and try one of those little tamale-like things that you were eating at the beginning of our time today. And I'd love to check out some of those retention ponds, and actually, I'd love to check out some of the crafts and the community there when it's back up and receiving tourists. So I hope for something like that in the future. God knows. Joe Brewer,
Well,
thank you.
Thank you, Dean. Keep it at it. I love what you're doing.
Thanks for watching another episode of the Poetry of Predicament podcast, produced by Dean Walker and the Living Resilience Alliance, www.livingresilience.net. Music today from Michael Hedges, as always, and also Port Blue Into the Sea. Also available on our website, www.livingresilience.net, is a wide array of articles, online learning series, arranging group and individual resilience coaching, and sign up for our every other Tuesday free support group that we call Safe Circle Calls.